Here we are once again with our friend Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, and we're going to do chapter 16, Love, and it begins with the phrase, bear love to thy neighbor as to thyself. I am the Lord. And it's from Vayikra, chapter 19, verse 18, and let's just look at it in context for a second. So the section begins with, you shall not be a gossip monger among your people, Lashon Hara. You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. I am Hashem. The next verse is, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, which we spoke about quite recently. Right? You shall reprove your fellow and do not bear his sin because of him. Right? And now here comes the next one, 18. You shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge against members of your people. You shall love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. Right? So this is clearly the sum of all the negatives you should not do. Right? You shouldn't be a gossip monger. You shouldn't allow your neighbor to be, your brother to be injured. You shouldn't, in his blood, you shouldn't stand aside while he's being attacked. You shouldn't bear a grudge, hate your brother in your heart. It's your duty to correct him in a way that works successfully with kindness, but to do it right. You shouldn't take revenge, which we've talked about before, or bear a grudge. It repeats to members of your people. And then finally it says, you shall love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. As if to say, the quantity of avoiding all these negatives, it's reminiscent of Hillel's advice, right? Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. That can result in love. So let's see what Rav Hirsch says. Love all that I have placed by your side. Feel that its existence is necessary for your existence, its welfare for your welfare. Feel even that your existence, your welfare, your vocation is completed only by its existence. Let your soul be linked with its being. I am Hashem, who loves all and calls all upon you. Man, be the instrument of this love. With this injunction, God breaks open a seal of your heart. He circumcises your heart. And He bids you make a covenant of love with everything which bears the stamp of its divine origin and is not itself given the lie to it. He bids you embrace all the children of God with a loving heart. So the point that Rav Hirsch is making here is that the expression, man can't be an island. But by the way, even an island is God's creation. So he's saying, how can you live in this world without being filled with an abundance of love? Because everything in this world is a product of Hashem, that Hashem put there for you to love His creation. So the only exceptions that Rav Hirsch seems to bring to this rule of recognize godliness and love it in all things is when you recognize something that is a false representation of God. Right? So he says, love everything which bears the stamp of the divine origin and is not itself given a lie to it. So there are those who pose in piety. There are those who use God, the name of God and God, to do things that are the opposite of what are the will of God. Those things you don't have to love.
We're really dirty.
Right? Yeah. And those things obviously you don't have to love. But when you see something that bears the stamp of creation, which is virtually everything, right? Know that it's created from love and that you should be loving it and that you don't live in isolation. To see in your fellow man something else than merely a rival for the acquisition of good things on earth, not to look upon his good as an encroachment on yours, to let your neighbor have the spot of earth on which God has set him, as He has set you on yours, and even to let him prosper on it. All this amounts merely to not hating him, not yet loving him. So this actually comes to the point of how this verse fits in, right? because the verse begins with all the things you should not do, which would be described as hating a person. But Hirsch says that's not love. That's the avoidance of hate. Yeah? So, there's an expression that's very popular today that we should be a tolerant society. Tolerant society. Right? It's a very meritorious idea. An intolerant society is very bad, so we should be tolerant. It's a very strange phrase. Yeah. What does tolerant mean? Tolerant means that you're willing to coexist with that which you despise.
Yeah, but that's
really what it means.
Yeah.
Right? Hirsch is not saying be tolerant. He's saying find the godliness in things. And when you find the godliness in things, you can't aught but love it. Right? So it's not, I don't really like him, but I'll put up with him because, he davens with me in shul. That's tolerant. No, he's saying look inside that person and see the gem, the spark of godliness in him, and that's what you should love. And, Hasidus tells us that the things we see in a person we don't like is probably a reflection of something we don't like in ourselves. That's right. But that's not Hirsch. It's just something to have in the back of your mind. So all this amounts merely to not hating him, not yet loving him. To love your neighbor means to see in him the one condition of your own existence, your own welfare, of your fulfilling your mission as a man and Israelite, and so in the desire of your own being and living to include the desire for your neighbor also. And by the way, this is godliness. God created man in order to be good and do good. He wanted to have an object on which to do good. Right? And that was man. So that when we see somebody and we choose to do good to that person and care about that person, right? This is godly behavior. The indispensable condition of being your welfare and your mission. Who could be so dull as not to feel this? Imagine for a moment that all your fellow men whom God has placed at your side have disappeared, and that you are alone on the desolate earth. This is not like on a garden island.
Yeah.
This is alone on the whole earth.
World, yeah.
Right? What would be your existence? What pleasure could you have? Still more, what would become your mission if you were not able to love and do kindness? You have been created to be a blessing, and you would have no one who would receive your blessing. You've been born to do kindness. You are meant to support, to sustain, to comfort, and to instruct, and to nourish, and to make happy, and to revive, and you would have no one for whom you could do all this. And do you not see that it is only in association with mankind as a whole that God endows your work with permanence? Mankind takes up the work of each individual and, itself undying, becomes the heir to it. Without it, your work would be but a dream. A person who works in isolation just for himself, not for the betterment of the world, right, lives in a kind of unreality, right? Because our reality is that we are among people, right? And that is actually our nourishment. It's not our problem, right? It is our pleasure. And if somebody has tsuris and we can help them, it's not that it's our pleasure to do it, but it's the fulfillment of a mission that's before us. And there's no more satisfying, more godly behavior than the fulfillment of a mission that involves kindness. But we can go still higher, even higher than this. I, the Lord, the personification of love and Father of all beings around you, have called them all like you to life and well-being. If you love me, because you love me, love my children. Rejoice in their well-being. See in each my work, my child. In his welfare, the prospering of my work, my child. In his woe, the decay of my work, the suffering of my child. Love, therefore, the master in the work, father and child. we know, there's a question that's often asked by Chazal and Chassidus. It says, which is more important to Ahavas Yisrael or Ahavas Hashem? Love of God or love of Israel? And by extension, mankind. And it's not even a kasha, it's not even a question. Right? Because if you think about any father, would he rather his children hug him and fight with each other, or hug each other and argue with him? Clearly the latter, right? You want your children to love each other, to get along, right? How much more so it is with the Creator of all. Finally, I am the Lord, the personification of love, who has chosen man to be the instrument of this love. Do you, man, not see how this love is the finest flower of this mission? How do you raise yourself above the stone, the plant, the animal? It's not through devoting yourself to your own free will to do welfare of the world around you. Is it not? The question is, how do you raise yourself above the level of the inanimate object or the animal? The animal takes care of its own. The animal does what's required. He says, what's the difference? It's not simply you're a thinking being. And it's not simply that you have free will, all of which are unique to man. Or that you communicate with words, that you are a medaber, a speaker. These are all things that separate us from the next level run down. No. He says, is it not through devoting yourself of your own free will to the welfare of the world around you? And this is just what love affects.
It's true. Why else would you do it?
Right. So this is what it's about. This is what makes a man a mensch, makes a person a mensch. Your whole activity belongs to God's world. First, then, belonging to it with the source of your activity, with your heart, carry in it love for God's world, above all for your fellow man, the first and worthiest recipient of your beneficent activity. Carry love in your heart. It is this which makes you a man and an Israelite, a Jew. This willingness to love, this willingness, and how so it describes really what we understand to be God's relationship with us. This love in you, if it is genuine, expresses itself in deeds with which to the best of your ability, you promote the progress of the world around you to the state of welfare in which your love requires that you should desire to behold it. So this is a very, very important point of Hirsch and of Judaism, and that Hirsch crystallized in his philosophical position. He's saying that love is not an emotion. Love is an action. That simply feeling good about somebody else, feeling a warmth towards somebody else, this is not the love that is godly. The love that is godly is doing things that manifest this love, not the potential of it actually manifest. He believed the description of his philosophical position was Torah im derech eretz, right? Torah with derech eretz, right? Which comes from a Mishnah. We'll talk about it more in detail when we talk about Hirsch's biography. But it means in the Mishnah that Torah should be combined with work. That it's not simply something that is separated from the world. That it's you have a trade and you have Torah and they work together in life and they're not separate. Right? A person doesn't go live on a mountaintop and study Torah. He does his job and Torah is part of it and he learns to say so. Because Torah infuses all of his actions. That's why. Torah im derech eretz came to be understood as the coexistence of Torah and this world. And I don't mean coexistence to indicate an equality between the activities of this world and Torah, but rather that they don't have to be separate spheres. They are a sphere within a sphere. That the world of, your job, the world of buying a car, the world of learning history or math or programming, they are worlds that coexist with learning Gemara. But learning those things exist within the circle of Torah. Nothing is outside the circle of Torah. This is a very important point of Hirsch's you always have to keep in mind. Torah in Derech Eretz is that there is room within the world of Torah for other studies and other learning and other activities, but they are not outside of Torah. That's, I think, the most important point of this. This love in you, if it is genuine, expresses itself in deeds, which to the best of your ability you promote the progress of the world around you to the state of welfare in which your love requires that you should desire to behold it. The rules that should guide you in the practice of this love, so that you should not do mischief under the mistaken impression that you are promoting welfare, are revealed in the whole of the Torah. In respect to your fellow man, this is the rule of love your neighbor as yourself, which consequently, as a positive commandment, belongs to the mitzvah. So the idea, what is love? Love is to do for your neighbor what you wish for yourself. Very often we wish for ourselves that we could go to a later minyan, and we wish for our neighbor that he could pray more diligently. Right? Or we wish for ourselves a Cadillac, and we wish for him that he should have a good fast. Right? No, if we want a Cadillac, wish a Cadillac for him too. And if you wish him a good fast, maybe you should be wishing yourself a good fast as well. So this is the idea of love, and love, like everything else in Torah and everything else in the world of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, is something that is not simply in potential, but is in action. And so we always have to keep that in mind. Sometimes we have trouble defining what our action should be. We want to do good, and so we make a judgment, this is good. This is generally not the wisest thing to do, because Torah will guide us into what is good, and what is good may not always be what it appears to be for us. So we should not hesitate to fall back on love. Compassion, Rachamim, chapter 17. Okay, so let's just look at it in context.
Deuteronomy.
Devarim 15:7. We're moving ahead quite quickly, which is good because we can get to a whole new section soon.
This is the quote is exactly what you were just talking about.
Harden not thy heart against thy brother. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's right at the beginning of a section. If there shall be a destitute, a poor person among you, any of your brethren in any of your cities, in the land that Hashem your God gives you, you shall not harden your heart or close your hand against your destitute brother. Rather, you shall open your hand to him. You shall lend him his requirement, whatever is lacking in him. Because lest there be a lawless thought in your heart, saying, the seventh year approaches, the remission year, and you will look malevolently upon your destitute brother and refuse to give him. Then he may appeal against you to Hashem, and it will be a sin on you. You shall surely give him, and let your heart not feel bad when you give him. For return for this matter, Hashem your God will bless you in all your deeds and in every undertaking. For destitute people will not cease to exist within the land. Therefore I command you, saying, You shall surely open your hand to your brother, to your poor, and to your destitute in your land. So this is a very, very interesting point that the Torah is making. Yeah, it's about tzedakah, but it's about what is a big concern, actually. First of all, Hirsch is emphasizing that the kindness that you do will always be rewarded. Sometimes in this world, sometimes in the next world, sometimes monetarily, sometimes in different ways. But you will not suffer a loss because of a kindness you did for somebody who was needy. This is a promise that the Torah is making. But the Torah is giving you a test, and it's one that we have a lot of trouble with. And Hillel had to make an adaptation in order that we can manage the test. You know, when you lend money between Jews, you can't charge interest. Please come in. Good to see you. Please join us.
To support your undertaking.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Paul, this is Charles. You know each other.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Please have a seat.
You're busy studying?
We're just learning a little bit of Rav Hirsch. We're about to start learning about compassion. What he writes about compassion. Right? And then maybe in about 10 minutes I'm going to stop and we'll start to learn a little bit about who Rav Hirsch was.
Okay.
Right? Because that's
here?
Yeah. We'll do it here.
Sit down.
So just make yourself comfortable. So the test of compassion, Rav Hirsch says, is don't harden your heart against your brother. But the verse he takes it from is a very interesting verse in the Chumash, in the Sefer Torah, because he's talking about the Shemitah year. Right? So what happens is that Jews, when they lend to each other, there's no interest charged. Right? You're forbidden to charge interest because it's in the family. Right? You know, if your brother or sister would ask you, "Can I borrow $50 from you?" you wouldn't say, "Yeah, but at the end of the month, give me back $55." You would say, "Sure, you know, if I can help you, fine. Right? Give it back to me when you can." Right? So, since Jews as a group are a family first and a religion second, it's unseemly to charge interest to family members. Right? So the Torah forbids it. But more than that, the Torah says that when the 7th year of the cycle comes around, that loans are canceled. Right? So let's say I'm having trouble paying the rent, and we're 6.5 years into the Shemitah cycle. I come to Charles. I said, "Charles, look, can I borrow $1,200? I'll pay you back in a year." Right? Now, Charles might say to himself, "Well, wait a second, I'll never see that money. 6 months from now, all debts are erased." David, I'd like to lend you the money, but I just don't have liquid assets right now. So, you know, maybe ask me in 6 months. Because in 6 months, the guy has 7 years to pay it back, right? So the Torah says, do not harden your heart. If someone comes to you in the 11th month of the 6th year and asks you to borrow money and he needs it and you have it, lend it to him. Right? I'll take care of you, says God. You won't lose from doing this. Right? That's a big test. Big test.
I wonder if there's more loans happens in the religious community on this last month of the year.
So I'll tell you what happens. That in the time of Hillel recognized that this was a very big problem. That in spite of the fact the Torah says these words, it says, beware lest you have a lawless thought. It's like a criminal thought in your heart, saying the 7th year approaches, the remission year, and you look malevolently at your destitute brother and refuse to give him. Then he may appeal against you to Hashem, and it will be a sin upon you. Right? You're going to get cursed for it. Right? You shall surely give him. Let your heart not feel bad when you give him, for in return for this matter, Hashem your God will bless you in all your deeds and in every undertaking. So God's saying, do it, right? You do it, and I'll take care of you, right? By the way, if anybody's watching KosherTube, they want to test this, feel free. But in a serious, it's a light note. In a more serious note, is that in the time of Hillel, he recognized that people wouldn't loan money to poor people just before the end of the Shemitah year, because they were basically just giving it away, and they felt they weren't going to get it back. So he found a way to deal with it. It's called a prosbul, and you'll see at the 7th year, when people on the morning of Rosh Hashanah go to annul vows, that on the 7th year it's a slightly different prayer in which there's a prosbul exists, right? What's a prosbul? The prosbul says as follows: all debts between individuals at the end of the Shemitah year, right, are null and void. No question about it. But you remember that loan that I was asking Charles for, and he couldn't come up with the liquid funds on time to help me, knowing that 6 months from now he wasn't get it. Charles has a new approach. He says, yeah, I'm going to lend it to you, but you know that any debts I have at the end of the year end up going to the Beis Din. Right? They belong to the Beis Din. They don't belong to me anymore. That's right. They belong to the Beis Din. They don't belong to me anymore. So at the end of the 7th year, there's no debt between you and I. But by the way, the Jewish court's expecting you, sometime to pay it back. I know that you have it in mind to pay it back, David. You wouldn't expect to void that debt. So Hillel instituted the idea of a prosbul, which means that all debts at the end of the 7th year leave the ownership of the individual.
But it transfers to the Beis Din?
Go to a Beis Din.
It's automatically, or so one should...
You have to... No, you have... You're asking a very good question. It's automatic in the sense that it's in the davening. It's in the prayer of the 7th year. But you can choose not to use it if you want.
But if you use it where it goes to the Beis Din, then what happens?
Then what happens is the debt continues to exist. You pay it to the Beis Din.
So
the person who owes the money...
It does exist.
It does exist. You pay it to the Beis Din.
The person who owes the money still pays the Beis Din, though?
Pay it to the Beis Din, and the Beis Din becomes your collection agency. They take a piece of the action, in principle, right? And then you get some of it back, right?
So it's not so scary as it sounded at the beginning.
Hillel instituted it, right?
How can they do that when all debts are supposed to be cancelled? It's still
it's all debts between individuals.
Oh, and the Beis Din is not an individual.
No, that's right. It's institution. Yeah. Right. So you can give your debt to the Beis Din. That's right. He found the loophole not in order to be able to collect. That wasn't actually the issue. The issue was that
to get people to loan money.
Weren't loaning money when they knew that it was really a gift, right? And they didn't have that enough kindness in their heart and enough faith that God would take care of them in any loss they had. Yeah. So Hillel instituted this process. Now, interestingly, I had an experience myself where I had somebody owed me money, and I knew I was never going to be able to collect it. The person was not an honorable person. But it was also a tremendously frustrating process for me because, every 15th of the month, I would give the guy a call and say how things going, and he would lie to me. And I would let it go, and the 15th of the month would come up, next 15th, and my calendar would say call so-and-so. I would call him, and the whole process was very unpleasant. So when the Shemitah year came up, I said, I'm not going to use a prosbul. I only had one person who owed me money, right? This guy. Right? I said, I'm actually going to relieve myself of the stress because I was never going to collect the money. Right? I knew I was never going to collect the money, and for me it was very stressful to keep trying to collect it. Right? The guy ended up being criminal. He scammed a lot of people. Ended up in jail, actually.
Oh my!
So God took care of the issue. Right? But for myself, I don't know how. I think we've all had the experience at one time or another where we lent somebody money.
Oh yeah.
And they couldn't pay it back, or they didn't pay it back, or you were a low priority for paying it back. They're friends of yours, and it can really ruin the relationship.
Oh yeah.
Yeah? So I found for myself, the Shemitah year was very convenient, because once the Shemitah year hit, and I didn't use the prosbul, right, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
Because
now,
the debt is cancelled.
Yeah, I mean, it may sound funny. What was the weight that was lifted off my shoulders? The guy owed me money.
Yeah.
Right? But it was a weight. It was a thing. So I felt tremendously relieved by it. Now, interestingly enough, it's such an unusual thing to do that when I wanted to do it, because you do it in front of the Beis Din when you annul vows on the morning of Rosh Hashanah, people were very upset with me. They said, "You can't do this. You have to use prosbul." And I said, "No." I checked with my Rav on the subject at the time. I checked with a major halachic authority, at the time, and I said, "Look, this is my situation. I don't want to use the prosbul. Is that okay?" And he said, "It's very unusual, but it's your choice. You can do it if you want." Now, interestingly enough, another Rav later told me, he said, "You shouldn't have done it." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Why?" "I did it for myself." And he said, "Yeah, you did." He said, "And you turned him into a criminal." I said, "How so?" He said, as long as he owed you money and you were trying to collect from him, he was somebody who was slowly paying you.
Oh my. Right? By saying that
when you canceled his debt,
he stole it.
You took the position that he's a crook, and he accepted that.
Oh my.
Now, ironically, the guy ended up in jail later. I don't think it was because of me.
No, but Hashem probably considered this information.
But so what the test of compassion that Rav Hirsch is talking about in this section is not simply, gee, I feel bad for the guy, or I feel bad. He's saying, in the time of Shemitah, on the 6 years and 11 months, when somebody comes to you and says, "Can I borrow some money?" Right? Don't harden your heart. Be compassionate, right? And God will, as it says here. Right? It says, "And you shall surely give him, and let your heart not feel bad when you give him, for in return for this matter, Hashem your God will bless you in all your deeds and in your every undertaking."
That's really nice.
Yeah. So let's see what Rav Hirsch says about this. Okay. Compassion, rachamim. Compassion is the feeling of sympathy, which the pain of one being, of itself awakens in another. Right? When you see somebody's pain, it awakens a feeling in yourself. The higher and more human the beings are, the more keenly attuned they are to re-echo the note of suffering, which like a voice from heaven penetrates the heart, bringing to all creatures a proof of their kinship in the universal God. So he's saying it's natural to feel rachamim. It's natural to feel compassion. Why? Because there is a real connection between all human beings, right? In terms of their soul, in terms of their connected.
That's what he means by them.
And he's
better ones.
Universal God. And as for man, whose function it is to show respect and love for God's universe and all its creatures, his heart has been created so tender that it feels with the whole organic world, bestowing sympathy even on beings devoid of feeling, mourning even for fading flowers, so that if nothing else, the very nature of his heart must teach him that he is required above everything else to feel himself the brother of all beings, and to recognize the claim of all beings to his love and his beneficence. So he's saying, if you can feel the emotion of a fading sunset, a fall day with the leaves falling, right? If you have feelings of, people well up with tears sometimes at something that's not particularly sad, they just somehow feel a connection to it. He's saying, how much more so with the human being itself? Do not suppress this compassion, this sympathy, especially with the suffering of your fellow man. It is the warning voice of duty, which points out to you your brother in every sufferer, and your own suffering in his, and awakens the love which tells you that you belong to him and his suffering with all the powers that you have. Do not suppress it. If you thrust it back too often, it will no more well up of itself, and you will have cut yourself off from the company of all your fellow creatures. You yourself will have destroyed the first proof of your mission as a man and as an Israelite. Your heart becomes a stone, and there no longer sounds in it the voice of Hashem, of God, reminding you of your mission. The sympathy you feel, to people who are in trouble, right, is a sign of your humanity and your godliness. Right? And don't try to tough it out. Don't try and be, cold and say, I'm going to get through this. I don't have to feel this feeling. Right? You should feel it. It's the most human of feelings. Do not suppress it either as the disturber of your own comfort. You can't sleep at night because you're worried about somebody else. Worry. Pray for them. Help them. Rather, see in it the admonition of God that you are to have no joy so long as your brother suffers by your side. Do not suppress it because you feel it calling on you to share your possessions. Rather, let it be a sign to you that your property does not belong to you, but that God has given everyone in need a claim on it. Do not suppress it out of shame for an unbecoming weakness, out of shame for that which God has given you yourself as the warranty for your noble mission as a man and as an Israelite. When the sigh of the suffering humanity elicits a kindred sigh from you, when its sorrow makes your countenance also sad, and the tear of sympathy comes to your eye, then you are ennobled. That is what proves to you that you are a man and an Israelite. At the moment of compassion, right, is a moment that really reveals the inner nature of a person, the inner goodness of a person, that they can feel that.
Don't be a rock.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting because we see in this week's Parsha, right? Here's Abraham mourning the death of his wife, right? And we see two completely opposite ways of behaving, right? One is by the community, B'nai Ches, the children of Ches, right, who feel privileged to have Abraham in their midst. And they say, anything you want, you should bury Sarah, here, that she, among us, you are a man of God, you're a noble person, we feel your suffering, and the sooner you can take care of this, the better. And on the other is Ephron, who's a real Rasha, who says to Abraham, hey, we're, take it, it's yours, if you want, right? He says, I think I should pay for it. He said, well, since you want to pay for it, I'm going to charge you $1 million for something that's worth $10. But it's nothing to you, and nothing to me either. Right? This is so Ephron didn't feel the compassion at all.
He charged a lot of money.
And in the end, the irony of it is that Ephron had a tremendous loss from it. He lost the entrance to Gan Eden. He lost the place where Adam and Chava were buried, right? And that this was a place that Abraham knew exactly what it was, and he would have paid much more if he had to for this.
You're talking about the cave
of the Machpelah. Yeah. There's a story. There's a medrash that says that he knew about this cave because when he was a shepherd, one of his flock ran into the cave. And when he chased the animal, the animal into the cave, when he grabbed the animal, he smelled Gan Eden. The smell of Gan Eden, because it was still on the kevers of Adam and Chava. Right? So he knew that this was in the end going to be the family plot. that this is where he wanted to come. Says,
that's in Hebron, right? You can go there.
Yeah. I davened there on the fast of Gedalia, Tzom Gedalia, about 2 or 3 years ago, and I had an aliyah there. It was very special, actually. It was amazing. It was like right beside the grave of Abraham. He ends with, "Yet be on your guard against letting sympathy degenerate into hypersensitivity." Right? Hirsch never kind of lets it go completely. Remember when we were learning about you shouldn't hate? At the end, Hirsch made very clear there's a place to hate. There's a moment that hate is proper. Right? So here, where he's been dwelling on the fact that never limit your compassion. Never be afraid you'll be viewed as a softie. Right? Go ahead and do it. He has one last paragraph, right? It's like Columbo,
one more thing.
He says, "Yet be on your guard against letting sympathy, rachamim, compassion, right, degenerate into hypersensitivity, which identifies itself with the sufferers to such an extent that it retains no composure or power or strength to help. Such excess is fatal to the performance of the duty to which sympathy calls you. Rather, accustom yourself at an early age to give practical help to the suffering of every kind." So this comes back to a concept that we were talking about earlier, is the very philosophical underpinnings of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is based on a concept of Torah im derech eretz, the Torah and derech eretz. So what does it mean? We'll come back to this maybe one more time next week, but in Perkei Avos there's a reference to it in chapter 2, section 2. It says Rabbi, which is Yehuda Hanasi, right, said, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi said, "Torah study is good together with an occupation, for the exertion of them both makes sin forgotten." Right? So what is the point here? This is so that here it is in Hebrew. Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz. Right? So he's saying that we are not a nation of ascetics who take our holy words and go into the desert or go into the mountains, right, and study. He's saying you need to combine Torah with work. It's a very, very important concept. Right? So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who lived at the time of the growth of Reform Judaism, at the explosive growth of Reform Judaism in Germany, was part of an answer to this growth, right? Was to say, lest you think that Judaism is not part of this world, it's very much part of this world. And so what you'll find with Rav Hirsch constantly is that he's a tremendous philosopher and he's a poetic writer, but the bottom line of everything he talks about is action. It's always action. So what does he say? He says, never harden your heart against somebody else. Always be compassionate. Always being kind. Feel their pain. There's a very famous story of, I think it was Rabbi Levin in Jerusalem. I'm not sure who it was. But he was in his 80s, and his wife had injured her leg. And they went to the doctor. And the doctor said, "And what's wrong?" And Rabbi Levin said that. He said, "Our leg hurts. Our leg hurts." Right? He should have said, "My wife's right leg hurts." Right? Right? He said, "Our leg hurts." Right? He was feeling it too. Right? There's the expression, "I feel your pain." Right? more often than not, that's a joke. It's not serious. You know, it's a politician trying to get votes. Right? But Hirsch says you should feel it. You know, there's a concept that when a Jew injures himself in Istanbul, we should feel it in Jerusalem, right? Because we're family, right? You know, it's. I mean, how many times did it happen when you see a child on the playground, you know, and they fall and they scrape themselves? As they're falling, you feel a certain pain yourself, right? It's like, you know, well, you didn't actually hurt yourself, but you felt. It's a very deep feeling. Right? Hirsch says we should feel this on all levels, emotionally, not just physically. But he stops, right? He says feeling is not just what it's about. Feeling drives you to action, to do something to help the person, right? So as if to have finished saying you shouldn't withhold money in the last year, and you should feel compassion, you should feel pain. He ends up by saying, you know, if you're going to be so emotional and so messy in your sympathy that you don't help the person, you just sit and cry with them and make them more miserable, you know, at the end of the day, that compassion is worthless. It's not worth anything. You've done more harm than good. Right? Such excess is fatal to the performance of the duty with which sympathy calls you. Rachamim calls you. Rather, accustom yourself at an early age to give practical help to the suffering of every kind. So don't be so cold that you say, someone else will take care of that problem. But don't be so emotional that you're unable to help. Oh, I feel the pain again. Right. No. Say, I understand how that person's feeling. What action can I do to relieve the pain? Right? So it's the nature of Rav Hirsch's. Good thoughts are only a launching pad for proper action. Right? And this, of course, is something very much built into Judaism. The idea of the good person, you know, that good person needs to be defined by good actions, not just simply, you know, I'm good in my heart. You have to do something about it.
Practical is better than just looking.
Yeah.
Do you want to continue resentment or give the history?
Maybe we should learn a little bit about who Rav Hirsch was.
Okay. We have two more to go, 18 and 19, then we end up section.
What we've been reading,
sections,
just to bring up to date, is that
did you start it before? Or
the truth is that I started this probably 6 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, about 6 months.
Right. So anybody who wants to catch up in HOREB, they can. And there also, we've been recording the videos, I think, pretty well most of the time.
All of them, yeah. You can see up to where we are on this on KosherTube.
But we're just on, we have 18 and 19, which are
20.
resentment,
judging one's neighbor,
and gossiping, listening to evil, and
judging one's neighbor.
The last one is judging one's neighbor, right?
Then we start.
And then we're going to start a whole new section, which is really when this class of history will start.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to do in the time remaining, and I may do this, I may repeat it if everybody is kind of generous with it next week a little bit as well.
Brief repetition.
But brief repetition is not bad, is who was this man, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, right? And that's what I wanted to focus on a little bit, because to understand his writings and why it is that I felt that it was very valuable for us to learn it, right? Is to understand the world in which Rav Hirsch lived. So, just let me find the beginning. Some notes here. So, Rav Hirsch was born on June 20th, 1808, and he lived to 1888. Right? Now, those times were the time of the Haskalah, the Enlightenment. It was times of the Industrial Revolution, as we know it. And of course, Germany was one of the great centers of scientific and technological growth in those years. And the Jews were very much in the middle of it. It was a post-Napoleonic era in which Jews were given far greater civil rights in Western Europe than they'd ever had before. Napoleon supported the idea that he said, a Frenchman who is a Jew gets all the rights of any other Frenchman. Says a Jew who's a Frenchman, that's a bigger problem, right? That is to say, be a Frenchman first, a French Jew rather than a Jewish Frenchman, right? But still, it was a great leap forward from what it had been before. Germany was a tremendously positive and thriving place for Jews. But with this openness came assimilation. And the most famous form of assimilation was the reform of Judaism. Now, because of the world we live in today, when you check off a document, that says, what denomination of Jew are you? Right? So you can check off, I'm a Reformed Jew, I'm a conservative Jew, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and then there are many others. There's a Humanist Jew, and there's a Reconstructionist Jew, and there's all kinds of different Jews. But the three major ones, I think everybody would recognize, are Orthodox, Conservative, and Reformed. And we think of it as, which one do I want to choose? I don't want to be too religious, so I guess I'll be Reformed. I want to be very religious, so I'll be Orthodox. Right? Yeah, I'm not sure. Right? Maybe, I want to be able to drive to shul, but I want to be able to daven intensely. Right? I'll be conservative. And we kind of make choices that way, almost like you're ordering from a Chinese food menu, column A and column B. But in fact, when you look at historically, it was a very, very different story. Right? There was one form of Judaism. Right? There was what we call today Orthodox Judaism. And it was defined as Rabbinic Judaism. Right? The Christians referred to it as the Pharisees, the rabbinic view of the Torah, right? Interpretation of it. There were different ways of practicing this Judaism, whether you came from European stock or from Spanish and more Oriental stock. You had the Sephardic Jews and you had the Ashkenazi Jews, right? And there were some small differences in how they did things. Right? But the centerpiece of their religious belief was not simply Torah, but it was the oral Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. That we adhered to the code of Jewish law. We had a question we would ask a rabbi. There were no airplanes at the time of Moses, so what do we do about airplanes on Shabbos, right? And the Rav would think about it a great deal, and he would look for precedent, and because we view the Torah as being for all time, and he would say, here is where the Torah deals with issues that were intended to deal with the airplane, and he'll explain it to you. And so you worked within this code of Jewish law, and that was really what defined Judaism. Right? Then came a time, and it wasn't conservative and then reform, it was reform, right? Where Jews, and they were German Jews predominantly, reacting to the Enlightenment time, the Industrial Revolution, there were two reactions, major reactions. In Eastern Europe, they made a decision, whatever it is that our father did, we will do, and if he didn't do it, we won't do it. I used to go for Pesach to a rabbi's house. It was a Hasidic fellow, and he never served watermelon on Pesach. And he had a daughter who loved watermelon. And every Pesach she would say, Tati, there's no chametz in watermelon. There's no wheat in watermelon. Yeah. Right? There's no yeast in watermelon. Right? Why don't we have watermelon? And he would say, well, my mother's family never had watermelon on Pesach. And my father's family never had watermelon on Pesach, and they did very well. Right? We don't have to have watermelon on Pesach. She would say, Tati, They lived in Belarus. You know, in Minsk, there was no watermelon in April. Of course they didn't have watermelon. It wasn't they didn't want watermelon. You couldn't get a watermelon, right? My father's family didn't eat watermelon on Pesach. My mother's family didn't eat watermelon on Pesach. Your mother's family didn't eat watermelon on Pesach, and your mother's father's family didn't eat watermelon on Pesach. We're not eating watermelon on Pesach. And one day, his wife said, I give you a bracha that you should marry a man whose family ate watermelon on Pesach. And by the way, I think she did. I think she did. So, in Eastern Europe, this was the philosophy, right? Whatever they did, we continued to do, and nothing different, right? And from this was the growth of the Hasidic movement, right? It was also within Hungary, it happened as well, right? In Germany, there was another answer to it, right? And it was the answer that is probably most credited to Rav Hirsch, right? In Germany, Jews said, Judaism is good, right? But let's not make it A, so national, right? And B, mystical, right? We live in a scientific world. We have a tremendous understanding of how everything works, the mechanics of things, right? You know, take out that we yearn for Jerusalem, we're happy in Berlin, we're happy in Hamburg, we're happy in Frankfurt, we're doing well, right? Why do we have to seem to be not loyal to the country we're in? Right? Let's take that out of the prayers. Right? Let's take the stuff out that we can't understand. You know, what's this kosher thing? How serious is it really? You know, it's about refrigeration. We have refrigeration today. We don't have to worry about trichinosis, right? We don't have to worry about these kind of problems, right? There was a time when there wasn't refrigeration, you know, shellfish would make people die, right? If it went bad, right? Solve problem. So there are many issues that seemed not very practical. The way we see it today was Reform was offering an alternative. No, it wasn't that. Reform Judaism was intended to be the Judaism of the whole world. Right? It wasn't an attempt to say, okay, you've got Orthodox here, you've got Conservative here, you've got Reform here, choose which one you want. No. They were saying, right, that just as there is one form of Judaism for the last 2,000 years, there should continue to be one form of Judaism. But it's a different Judaism. It's our Judaism. It is Judaism reformed.
Or changed. Or
reformed. Corrected. Right?
Yeah.
So, Rav Hirsch took a much more I would say in some ways a much more risky position. You know, where in Eastern Europe they just said they built a wall. That's it, right? You know, the walls of the ghetto in Eastern Europe became the protection against the influence of the outside world, right? But my grandmother, who was from Austria, always resented the idea of romanticizing the ghetto. And she would often say, remember, the gates of the ghetto were locked at night from the outside.
Yeah.
Not from the inside. They were locking us out. We weren't locking them out. Right? But many Jews felt strongly that the ghetto was the protection. You know, the very famous story that the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, the first Rebbe of Lubavitch, worked actively for the defeat of Napoleon.
Yeah, he was for the Tsar.
And for the success of the Tsar. You would say to yourself, I understand, the Tsar was very good to the Jews and Napoleon was terrible to the Jews. Exactly the opposite. You know, Napoleon had a fascination with the Jews. He was interested in them. He had a positive view of them, right? And the Tsar, at the drop of a hat, would start a pogrom. The Tsar had no history of being kind to the Jews. Quite the opposite. He would force Jews at the age of 10, 12, 13, sometimes younger, to be enlisted in the army for 25 years to eliminate their Jewishness. For 25 years, they wouldn't have a siddur, they wouldn't be able to daven, they wouldn't eat kosher food, right? When they came out of it, they hardly understood what it was to be Jewish, and they were in tremendous pain when they would return to a community, because they had become Russian soldiers. There were many cases where parents would cut the trigger finger of their child's right hand so that he couldn't be enlisted into the Tsar's forces. So it was a horrendous situation, right? And yet the Baal Tanya supported the Tsar, right? Out of a loyalty to Russia? Not at all. Not at all. No. Out of his understanding of what it was the Jewish people required to remain Jewish. He thought, in a Napoleonic world, if Napoleon wins, that the Jews will become like non-Jews. Once given the opportunity, they will assimilate. Personally, I find that a very unfortunate commentary on Yiddishkeit. That in and of itself, it has the inability to stand.
You're saying that we're so easily swayed. He thought we were so easily swayed.
He thought that the only way a Jew will remain a Jew is by being oppressed and not given the opportunity. Now, by the way, I have to tell you, when you look at what's happened to the Jews after the emancipation, the Jews who came to America, the tremendously high rate of assimilation. And when you look back in history to the Hellenistic Jews, we're coming up to Hanukkah now, how much they supported the Greeks themselves, and what a small minority of what today we would call ultra-Orthodox, right, call them the Maccabees, were able to win the day. The Baal Tanya may have had a good point, right? On the other hand, Rav Hirsch says something different. He says, how are you teaching it? Right? If you're giving it over as something that is so removed and so separate and so restrictive that it's not appetizing, then perhaps the only way might be through oppression. Right? Now, by the way, the Hasidim, on one level, were restrictive, but on the other level, were tremendously joyous. The wives were full of song, and regardless of the oppression, they remained happy and in great faith. Right? But Rav Hirsch had the view of Torah im derech eretz. It comes, as I said, from the Mishnah, right? Mishnah Avos. It says Torah along with work, right? But he expanded it to say Torah along with the world around you, to be part of it. Analyze the world around you, right? And if this is something that is prohibited from Torah, then it is just as prohibited to us as it is to any other Jew. There's no room to cross that line. But if it's not prohibited, then examine it and see where its benefits are for our people. And so the consequence of it was that, today Hirsch is credited with the creation of modern Orthodoxy. I'm not exactly sure what some of these terms mean, but he was a deeply religious man. He believed that the Torah was 100% divine. He was a halachic Jew. He believed very strongly in the code of Jewish law. But he also was a philosopher. He wrote in German. He took on many ways that were in conflict with rabbinic authority. He was clearly brilliant. He was chosen as a chief rabbi at the age of 22. And so we'll look a little bit at his history here. In 1830, Hirsch was elected chief rabbi for Oldenburg in Germany. During this period, he wrote the book, The 19 Letters on Judaism, which were published under the pseudonym of Ben Uziel. This work made he was 22 years old. And it's a brilliant work. We'll learn it after we finish HOREB. This work made a profound impression on German Jewish circles because it was something new, a brilliant intellectual presentation of Orthodox Judaism in Hochdeutsch, in High German, Classic German, and a fearless, uncompromising defense of all Torah institutions and ordinances. So although it was in German, and although he was a very big philosopher, right, as you can see, even from the writing of Little Taste we had tonight, he sticks very much to the Code of Jewish Law and to the intent of it. In fact, he wrote HOREB before he wrote the 19 Letters.
You wrote this before the 19 Letters?
Yeah.
Sorry,
so it's even younger. That's right.
Oh my.
Right. He published the 19 Letters when he was 30.
Okay.
When he was 30, right? And he understood it would be popular. It's a series of letters between two people, a philosopher and a from Jew. And it was a tremendously popular book. It was very well received, right? And only after that did he publish HOREB, because he thought HOREB would never find a market, in fact. So Hirsch remained in Oldenburg until 1841. He was born in 1808, so that's what? 3, right. When he was elected Rabbi of the Hanover districts of Ulrich and Osnabrück, with a residence in Emden. During the 5-year post, he was taken up almost completely with communal work and had little time for writing. He did, however, found a secondary school and pushed Jewish studies, right? And that's when he created the term Torah im derech eretz. Torah is maximalized in a partnership with worldly involvement. That's what it actually means. Right? So now this should give everybody hope who wonders, like, will I succeed? Right? In 1843, you know Jonathan Sachs, right? The chief
Lord
rabbi
Jonathan
of
Sachs.
Lord Jonathan. Okay. In 1843, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch applied for the post of chief rabbi of the British Empire. Not bad. Out of 13 candidates, mostly from Germany, he reached the short list of 4. Nassim Marcus Adler, Hirsch Hirschfield, Benjamin Hirsch Auerbach, everybody's name was Hirsch, and Rav Hirsch. All vied for the position. They made it.
Okay, let Hirsch be the winner.
Adler won the position. Rav Hirsch didn't win the position. Adler won the position on December 1st, 1844, with 135 communities having 1 vote each. Adler received 121 votes. Right? Hirschfield received 12 votes, and Rav Hirsch received 2 votes. So he was not destined to be the Jonathan Sachs of his time. Right? In 1846, Hirsch was called to the rabbinate of Nicholasburg in Moravia, which was a huge Jewish community. Right? He became chief rabbi of Moravia and Austrian Silesia. In Austria, he passed 5 years in the recognition of the Jewish congregations and instruction of numerous disciples, and he had a tremendously large following there. Right? And he was struggling with Reform Judaism at that point, because Reform Judaism was growing with leaps and bounds, right? And what was happening was that traditional German Jewish communities, right, that had always been Orthodox, were being taken over by Reform Jews. You know, they were relatives. The younger brother has this view, the older brother has this view, right? You know, and there is one Jewish council for our town, right? And those councilmen interrelate with the governor of the province in terms of, how records are kept and funds and courts. Jewish courts had tremendous autonomy. Suddenly, the Orthodox organizations were falling aside and were being infiltrated and taken over by Reform Jews. Right? So, and it had many implications. The most important one was that the Code of Jewish Law was falling to the side, so that Judaism became much more relative. There wasn't a sense that there was a real right and wrong. There was a sense that you should determine as a good man what is right and wrong, regardless of your level of education, of understanding, of knowledge, right? And unfortunately, we've talked about this before, but unfortunately, the most evil people in the world don't think of themselves as wrong or evil. Adolf Hitler, Mach Shemo, his name should be erased, right? Felt he was doing great good to the world by cleansing it of Jews. He didn't think he was evil. He thought he was a good person, doing a tremendous labor of love for the German people. To cleanse the world. That was the term. He didn't say not murdering, clean the world. Judenrein, to clean the nation of Jews. Right? So the idea that a person says, okay, I'm like a character in a Batman movie. I'm here to be evil. Nobody does that. Right? So the question is, how do you know if you're doing an evil thing or not? Right? Because you think everything you do is good. Right? And there is objective good and evil in this world. Right? And the Torah is a guide for us in how to deal with it. Right? Once you say the Torah is not divine, once it loses that quality, then it becomes, kind of like the Constitution, which is a very valuable document in the United States, the Bill of Rights. But it's something that you can keep playing with and changes right and wrong depending on, the environment in which it exists. Right? So the subjects that you would think don't make any sense at all suddenly become the norm because it's a fad. Right? So the Torah said, no, it's not a fad, it's here because it's divine, it's infinite. Right? So Hirsch found himself struggling against this, right, big time. Right? In Moravia, he had a difficult time, on the one side receiving criticism from reform-minded, and on the other side from deeply traditional Orthodox elements, right? Which found some of his reforms too radical. Hirsch placed a much stronger emphasis on deep study of the entire Hebrew Torah, that is to say, Tanakh, including not just the Torah itself, and not just the Talmud, but also Navi, also the prophets, right? Rather than just the Torah and selected Bible readings, in addition to the Talmud, as he had been the custom of religious Jews up until then, who had focused really only on the Talmud and on, to a lesser degree, on the 5 books of Moses, and almost not at all on Navi. Yeah. In 1851, he accepted the call as rabbi of the Orthodox separatist group in Frankfurt. Right? So it sounds, what does it mean? They were the separatist group, yes, a part of the Jewish community which was otherwise largely had accepted classical Reform Judaism. By that time, in 1851, Reform Judaism was such a power in Frankfurt, right? Frankfurt was a center of industry and commerce, right? That he accepted the call of an Orthodox separatist group in Frankfurt. They were separating themselves from the norm, which was Reform Judaism.
Reform separatists or Orthodox?
No, the Reform had already succeeded
they took over.
at taking over. Yeah. So now the Orthodox were becoming the separatist group. Right? That's how far it had gone, right? And many people didn't understand why he would do this, because he was a tremendously successful Rabbi in Moravia, and he'd come to this place, and there was barely, I think, a minyan at the time when he began in Frankfurt. Barely an Orthodox minyan, right? The Reform had been so successful, taking over not just a shul, but the schools and the institutions and the Beis Din and everything. Everything was being taken over. So he came. This group was known as the Israelite Religious Society, the IRG. Came under his administration. A great congregation was numbering 500 families. Hirsch remained the rabbi of his congregation for the rest of his life. That's what he did, right? Hirsch organized the real shul and the burger shul in which thorough Jewish training was provided, along with those aspects of secular training deemed true according to Torah im derech eretz. He also founded and edited a monthly magazine, and most of the pages of the Jeshurun he filled himself. During 30 years after his death, his model became the model for Agudas Yisrael, which is now a power among the Jewish community. He was a tremendous lover of the land of Israel, but he felt that it should not be created that it should be created messianically. And there are some arguments that he didn't intend that, but it seems clear that he did. Hirsch lived in the post-Napoleonic era, an epoch when Jews had been granted civil rights in large numbers of European countries, leading to the assimilation and a call for reform. A large segment of his work focuses on the possibilities for Orthodox Judaism in such an era, when freedom of religion also meant the freedom to practice Torah precepts without persecution and ridicule. So this is really the heart of why I love Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, is that the struggle that he found himself in the middle of, right, is not a struggle that is foreign to us today.
Something, you know?
When you read Hirsch, it's like the ink is still wet, you know. And sometimes when I'm done reading, you know, a section of Hirsch, you know, it pains me that he isn't physically with us. You know, that we don't have the leadership of somebody like Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, because Rav Hirsch was able to recognize the benefits of technological development. He didn't yearn for a time without technology. He didn't yearn for a time without progress. He yearned that we would put everything in the context of Torah. And because Torah itself is godly and is infinite, there's no reason why it's not possible to do that. Others say, no, the temptation is so great that these things will destroy us if we allow ourselves and our children to be part of it. Hirsch said no. He said, make judgments. You have to make good judgments here. It's not that, you know, you can simply just throw a blanket over everything and say it doesn't exist. It exists. Right? We know that, you know, the Mishnah tells us, if you say there is no wisdom among the nations, you're not telling the truth. But if you say there's Torah among the nations, you're also not telling the truth. Right? So it means, and Rambam is blamed on this as well. You see, in every generation, it seems, or at every time of great change, there are leaders of our community that recognize how that change can become part of our lives and be a benefit to our Jewishness, not a diminution of it. Rambam, Yehuda Halevi, Ramchal, the Vilna Gaon, right? Rav Hirsch. If you ask me who it is today, I don't have an answer. I say today it's still Rav Hirsch. Right? He speaks our language, he speaks to us. And he's a tremendous guide in understanding where our place is. So I encourage everybody to continue. Next week, we're going to try to conclude.
We'll finish this.
We may conclude the last three pieces of this section, which are resentment, listening to evil, lashon hara, and judging one's neighbor. And then the following week we begin with the prohibition of work on Shabbos. And we're going to find out why Hirsch thinks we shouldn't work on Shabbos. Why Hirsch thinks we shouldn't work.
What he said.
You'll find out.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Next week.
Yeah.